I'd always believed I was content with my solitude. 8 years on this land, alone, and I never felt the need for anyone else. The wind, the land, my horses, those were my companions. And that was how I liked it. When I lost my family, there was nothing left to tether me to the world outside. So, I made peace with the silence that stretched for miles around me, far from anyone else's reach. But that was before the girls appeared. I was out by the north field, fixing a broken fence, when I saw them, a group of 6 young girls, no older than 12, stumbling through the brush. Their faces were pale, their clothes torn, as if they'd been walking for days. At first, I thought they were part of some group passing through, maybe lost travelers. But they weren't. These girls weren't local. They didn't belong to the ranchers or the settlers. No, something about them told me they came from a world far removed from my own. I watched them, hidden by the brush, as they staggered forward. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt something gnaw at my insides. They were barely standing, their steps wobbly, their eyes clouded with fear and exhaustion. A wave of dread washed over me, but with it came an undeniable urge, a need to help. I wanted to turn away, pretend I didn't see them. After all, this wasn't my fight. Getting involved could cost me my life. In this part of the world, helping the wrong person often had dangerous consequences. But then I saw their eyes, wide, helpless, like they were begging for something they didn't know how to ask for. I hesitated. A life lived in isolation makes it easy to forget the value of simple kindness. But I remembered someone, my own family, lost years ago. That fear, that same desperation, it was in their eyes. I knew it then. I couldn't leave them to fate. So I made my choice. I went to them. The next morning, as I went about my usual chores, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had followed me since the girls arrived, the sound of horses broke through the quiet stillness of the ranch. My instincts kicked in immediately, and I froze mid-task, listening closely. It wasn't just 1 or 2 riders. It was a whole group, their horses thundering against the dirt like a storm approaching. I quickly surveyed the landscape, my eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. Before I could find cover, the riders crested a hill in the distance, and my heart sank. They weren't just any riders. These were people from a nearby tribe, their distinctive markings and attire a dead giveaway. I had no idea who they were at first, but I could tell from the way they moved, the way their leader sat tall on his horse, that this was no casual search. They were here for something important, and whatever it wasn't going to end well for me. I ducked behind the barn, keeping my distance as they drew closer, my mind racing. There was no way to ignore this now. I had made a choice when I took those girls in, a choice that had led to this moment. What I didn't know was how deeply I had just entangled myself in a conflict that stretched beyond my understanding. I couldn't hide forever. The leader of the group was the first to dismount as they reached the perimeter of my property. His presence commanded attention, even from a distance. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face marked by the scars of battle and life on the trail. The rest of his men fanned out, some dismounting, others keeping their horses close. The air between us thickened with the weight of unspoken tension. I had to make a move. My only chance was to meet them head-on and try to explain myself. I had no illusions about what could happen next, but standing there, hidden in the shadows, wasn't going to solve anything. I wasn't some coward trying to avoid confrontation. This was my ranch, and I had done what I thought was right. Now I had to prove it. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out from behind the barn, my hands raised in a universal gesture of peace. I didn't know their customs, but I knew enough to understand that showing aggression could mean the end of me and the girls. The leader's gaze met mine immediately, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. His hand rested on the hilt of a blade at his side, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. He spoke to me in a language I didn't understand, his tone stern and commanding. I shook my head, trying to show that I didn't speak his language, but that only seemed to deepen his suspicion. "I saved them," I said, doing my best to speak slowly and clearly. "I didn't take them. I only helped." The leader looked at me, his eyes piercing, and I could tell he wasn't convinced. The girls were behind me now, standing in the doorway of my barn, looking scared and unsure of what was happening. I wasn't sure what kind of trouble I had gotten myself into, but I knew one thing. These people didn't look like they were here for a friendly chat. I repeated myself, my voice more urgent now. I saved them from the wilderness. They were near death when I found them. Please, I don't want any trouble. The leader didn't reply right away, his eyes moving back to the girls as they slowly came into view. For a moment, everything seemed to hang in the balance. There was a weight to the silence, like a storm about to break. Finally, the leader spoke again, and even though I couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear. His voice was like gravel, low, thick with authority, and whatever he said wasn't a request. It was a demand. He motioned for me to follow him, and, unsure of my options, I did just that. I couldn't back down now. The girls were depending on me, and I wasn't about to let them down. We walked toward the center of the ranch, the other riders falling into line behind us. I could feel their eyes on me, their gazes hard and judging. One of the men, a younger rider, kept glancing at the girls with open suspicion. It was clear that he didn't believe me, and I knew there was nothing I could say to change his mind. My only hope was that the leader would be more understanding, or at least willing to listen. We stopped just outside the barn. The tension in the air was so thick I could almost taste it. The leader turned to me, his expression unyielding. "Return them," he said sharply, his voice thick with authority. It hit me then. They weren't just here for answers, they were here to take the girls back. To their people, maybe, but who were these people to claim them as their own? I had no idea what the tribal customs were, or if I was even in the right by taking them in. But in my heart, I knew this wasn't a matter of ownership. It was a matter of life and death. "I didn't take them," I said, my voice rising in frustration. "I saved them. They weren't just lost, they were dying. You can't just take them back like this. They'll die out there." The leader didn't flinch. His face remained stoic, unmoved by my words. "Return them," he repeated, "or face the consequences." A chill ran through me. His words weren't just threats. They were a promise of something much worse. I stood there, trying to process the weight of the situation. I wasn't just dealing with a misunderstanding. This was deeper than that. I had stepped into something far bigger, something I didn't understand. The girls were already huddling together near the barn door, their faces pale and frightened. They had no idea what was going on, no concept of the danger that was closing in on all of us. They were looking to me for answers, for protection, and right now I had no idea how to give them either. The decision I had made to help them was spiraling out of my control, and I was beginning to realize that no matter what I did, I couldn't avoid the consequences of my actions. It was too late to turn back, but I had to find a way to prove that my intentions weren't hostile. I wasn't their enemy. I wasn't some thief or kidnapper. "I'm not the one who's wrong here," I muttered under my breath, more to myself than to the leader. "But I'm going to fix this." With those words, I knew the battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The leader didn't seem to hear me as he turned away, gesturing for his men to follow him. I was left standing there, my mind a whirl of confusion and fear. The moment had come to a head, and now I had no choice but to face it. I couldn't allow them to take the girls, not when I had already promised to protect them. But I knew something else now. This was about more than just returning some lost children. This was a matter of life and death, and not just for the girls. I looked over at the barn door where the girls had gathered, their eyes wide and uncertain, still struggling to understand what was happening. They hadn't seen the full scope of the situation yet, but they were about to. My heart twisted for them. They were no longer just refugees, they were now pawns in a game I didn't understand. And I had put them there. As I walked back toward the barn, I tried to steady my breathing. The tension in the air was unbearable, and I could feel the weight of the leader's demands pressing down on me. I had no idea what consequences they had in mind, but I could feel the heat of their gaze from across the ranch. They weren't going to leave without a fight. I reached the barn and found the girls huddled together, their faces pale with fear. They hadn't moved, not even an inch. There was something about their stillness that unnerved me. It was as if they had already accepted their fate, as if they knew what was about to happen and were too terrified to react. I could see the fear in their eyes, but there was also something else. Something that told me they weren't entirely helpless. I knelt in front of them, trying to calm my own nerves as I spoke. "Listen to me, girls," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm not going to let them take you. You understand." They looked up at me, their eyes wide, but none of them spoke. The eldest girl, the one I'd carried inside the night before, stepped forward. Her face was streaked with dirt and exhaustion, but her eyes were sharp, older than her years. I could see the fear in them, but also a quiet resolve. "You will protect us?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure how I could protect them from what was about to unfold. But I had no choice but to try. The eldest girl's eyes flickered with something, a recognition, a shift in the tension between us. She seemed to understand that there was no way to avoid what was coming. "I don't know how to stop them," I admitted, running a hand through my hair. "But I'll do everything I can to keep you safe." She nodded, though her expression didn't soften. It was clear that she didn't expect miracles from me, and I couldn't blame her. The situation was rapidly escalating beyond anything I could handle alone. But I had already committed to this path, and there was no going back now. The leader had already made his intentions clear. He wasn't going to back down without a fight, and neither would I. But as the minutes passed, I began to understand the weight of the decision I had made. I had opened a door to a world I didn't fully comprehend, and now I had to live with the consequences. I had been prepared to face a few questions, maybe even a few raised voices. But I hadn't expected this. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or a matter of diplomacy. This was a challenge to my very survival and, worse, to the survival of the girls I had promised to protect. As the leader and his men gathered by the campfire, I knew it wasn't going to end peacefully. They were waiting for me to make the next move. They were testing me, pushing me to see how far I was willing to go. I grabbed my rifle, the cold steel a reminder of the world I had come from, the world where force often spoke louder than words. But now I wasn't sure if this was a fight I could win. Guns might win wars, but they couldn't solve every problem. I walked outside and made my way toward the leader and his men. My heart pounded in my chest, the weight of my choices pressing against my ribs. Every step felt like a decision, every breath heavier than the last. I couldn't do this by myself. I needed to show him that I wasn't the enemy. But I couldn't deny the fear that gnawed at the edges of my mind. The leader noticed me before I even spoke. He turned to face me, his posture rigid and unyielding, like a wall I couldn't climb. The other riders watched, their eyes flicking between the leader and me, waiting for what would come next. I stood tall and raised my hands again, trying to show that I wasn't here to fight. "I didn't take them," I repeated more forcefully this time. "I saved them. They were dying. If you take them now, they will die." The leader stared at me, his expression hard as granite. His eyes were cold, calculating, as if he was weighing every word I said. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "You are a stranger in our land, but you have done something that has caught our attention. But your actions have consequences, just like any other choice." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. I wasn't just dealing with a misunderstanding. I was facing the fallout from an act of kindness, one that had set a chain of events into motion that I couldn't stop. And now I had to face whatever consequences that brought. He motioned for his men to spread out, and I could see the tension in the air. It was palpable, thick enough to cut through with a knife. No matter what I said, no matter how I tried to explain myself, the reality was that I had unknowingly crossed a line, one that couldn't be undone. The leader's gaze softened ever so slightly, but only for a moment. "You will come with us," he said, his voice firm. "We will speak to our people. Only then will we know the truth of your intentions." I knew then that this was no longer just a matter of words. I had no choice now but to walk the path they had set before me, even if it meant walking straight into the unknown. I had made my decision, and now I had to face the consequences. With a heavy heart and a mind full of uncertainty, I followed him, the weight of the girls' lives resting in my hands. No matter what came next, there would be no turning back. The ride to the tribe was a grim procession. I had no illusions about what awaited me at the end of the journey. The leader, whose name I still didn't know, rode in front, flanked by his men, with me trailing behind them, my eyes constantly scanning the landscape. The air between us was thick with silence, but it wasn't the comfortable kind of quiet you get after a long day's work. It was the oppressive, unspoken tension of people who are unsure whether or not the next moment will bring conflict. The girls had stayed behind, safely tucked into the barn for now. I had no idea what they were thinking, whether they understood the gravity of the situation or if they were still too afraid to process the truth. I glanced back at the ranch, its peacefulness now a stark contrast to the storm of conflict that was about to break loose. It was like the calm before the worst storm you could imagine. As we neared the edge of the tribal lands, my stomach twisted with dread. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I had to trust that my intentions would count for something. I had hoped that my actions would be enough to convince the leader of my goodwill, but deep down, I knew that just explaining myself wouldn't be enough. The stakes were too high now. Just as the sun was dipping below the horizon, we arrived at the edge of a clearing, and the full scale of the situation became painfully clear. A small group of warriors stood at the entrance to a camp, their eyes sharp and unreadable, watching us approach with a mix of curiosity and wariness. They were waiting for us, and I could see that their presence alone was meant to send a message. This wasn't a simple gathering of tribes. It was an event, one that would decide my fate. I was ushered into the center of the camp, and the leader dismounted, his movements deliberate. The sound of horses' hooves faded into the distance as the warriors stood in a wide circle around me. There was no escape now, no second chances. The air was thick with anticipation. They were waiting for me to speak, but even more so, they were waiting to see what kind of man I truly was. It didn't take long before the elders appeared. Their faces were weathered with years of hardship, and their eyes held stories I could never fully understand. They moved like shadows, their presence as commanding as it was quiet. I could feel their eyes on me, searching for any sign of weakness, any trace of deceit. But I had nothing to hide. The leader stepped forward and addressed the elders in their language. I didn't understand a word, but the tone was clear. This was a matter of great importance. They spoke in hushed voices, and even though I couldn't grasp their words, I could tell that what was being said was no small matter. Their gaze occasionally flicked toward me, and I felt the weight of their judgment settle over me like a heavy cloak. One of the elders, a woman with long silver hair braided in intricate patterns, approached me. Her eyes were sharp, like the edge of a blade, and she stared at me with a depth that made me feel small. Without a word, she reached out and took my hands in hers. Her touch was firm but not unkind. She studied me, her fingers moving over my palms as if reading the story of my life from the lines there. For a moment, I felt exposed, like she was seeing right through me. But then she spoke, and her voice was like the rustling of dry leaves. "You have chosen to protect these girls," she said. "But do you understand the price of your choice?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "I did what I thought was right," I said, my voice more uncertain than I intended. "I couldn't leave them to die." The elder's gaze softened slightly, but only for a moment. "To protect is to accept the burden of responsibility," she said. "You are not the only one who has made such a choice. There are others who will see your actions as a betrayal." Her words hit me like a blow. I had known that helping the girls might bring consequences, but hearing it from someone who had lived through more wars and struggles than I could imagine made it all too real. I wasn't just caught between two cultures. I was standing in the middle of a battlefield I hadn't prepared for. My intentions no longer mattered. The tribe's honor and traditions had been violated, and now I was the one who would pay the price for it. The tension in the air grew thicker as another group of warriors arrived. I saw their war paint, the sharp glint of weapons in their hands, and I knew instantly that they weren't here to discuss. The leader of this new group was a man whose face was marked by deep scars, evidence of a life spent in battle. He dismounted with the ease of a man who had seen far too much of war, his eyes scanning me with a predatory intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. This man was the real threat. He wasn't here to negotiate or reason. His people had already decided what I was. A threat to their traditions, a man who had stolen their children. And they were going to make me pay for it. "Where are the girls?" he demanded, his voice like the crack of thunder. I didn't answer right away. I knew that any words I spoke wouldn't matter. What they wanted from me wasn't a justification. It was retribution. "They're safe," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "They're inside the barn. Please, I only saved them." The warrior stepped closer, his eyes never leaving mine. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and every inch the warrior. He reached out, his fingers brushing against my chest in a way that felt more like a threat than anything else. "Safe?" he spat, the word dripping with contempt. "What you call safe may be a death sentence for you." Before I could respond, the elder woman spoke again, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Enough," she commanded. "We will not make a decision without understanding." Her words seemed to calm the warriors, but only slightly. The circle around me didn't loosen. It was clear that their decision was already made. I had crossed a line, and now I had to pay the price. As I stood there, facing the judgment of these people, the reality of my situation hit me with a force I hadn't expected. I wasn't just a man who had made a mistake. I was a man who had unknowingly sparked a conflict that could destroy everything I held dear. I had saved the girls from death, but in doing so, I had brought death to my doorstep. Now, I had no choice but to prove myself, to show them that I had no intention of dishonoring them, that I had only acted out of compassion. But the path ahead was fraught with danger, and I knew that no matter what I did, the consequences would follow me for the rest of my life. The firelight flickered across the faces of the gathered tribe, casting long shadows that stretched across the earth like fingers reaching for me. I stood there, at the center of their encirclement, the weight of their gaze heavy on my chest. I felt exposed, stripped bare in a way I never had before. The calm in the air before the storm had passed, and now there was nothing but the rising tide of impending violence and judgment. I had made a decision, one that had led me here. I had chosen to help the girls, to protect them when they needed it most, even though I hadn't known the full cost of that choice. But now, as the tension thickened and the warriors circled around me, I realized that the cost wasn't just my life. It was something much more profound, something I couldn't understand until now. The price of honor, responsibility, and the weight of a choice made in the heat of compassion. The leader, the one who had first brought me here, stood tall before me, his posture unwavering. His eyes were still locked on mine, the intensity of his gaze weighing heavily on me. I had done what I thought was right, but now it was time for me to prove it. I had to show him and all of them that my intentions were pure, that I wasn't some thief, some invader. I was a man who had acted from a place of humanity, and now I needed to show them that I would stand by that choice no matter the cost. "I never meant to steal from you," I said, my voice steady, though I could feel the tension in my own words. "I never meant to dishonor your tribe or your ways. I didn't take the girls. I saved them. I saw them suffering, and I couldn't just turn my back." There was a quiet murmur among the warriors as I spoke, some shaking their heads, others narrowing their eyes. The air was charged with disbelief, but I didn't look away. I knew that I wasn't just pleading for my life, I was pleading for their understanding. The elder woman, the one who had taken my hands earlier, stepped forward again. Her eyes met mine, unblinking. "You speak of compassion, of saving lives," she said softly, but her words were like the ringing of a bell. "But compassion has a price. The world doesn't function on kindness alone. If you want to save them, you must be willing to give something in return. You must give something of yourself." Her words echoed in my mind as if they were a riddle I couldn't solve. What could I give to make them understand? What could I sacrifice to show that my choice had been real? In that moment, the weight of the situation settled deep within me, and I knew what I had to do. "I will go with you," I said, my voice firm. The silence that followed my words was deafening. The air felt thick with the unspoken tension. I could see the surprise on the faces of the tribe, and I knew I had made the only choice left for me. I will go to your village. I will stand before your people and prove that I am not your enemy. I will answer for my actions. The leader looked at me, his face unreadable. The elders exchanged glances, and I could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on me. I wasn't sure if this was what they had expected, but I knew I had to face them. I had to prove that I hadn't acted out of malice, that I wasn't here to steal or harm. I had done what I believed was right, and now I would face the consequences. The leader nodded slowly, a gesture that seemed to confirm my fate. "You will come with us," he said, his voice carrying the finality of a decree. "But know this, you are no longer just a man who helped. You are a man who has taken responsibility for your actions, and you will face the consequences." I nodded in return, feeling the weight of his words settle over me. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about standing by my choice, about showing them that I had understood the true meaning of responsibility. As we walked toward the village, I felt a sense of finality in the air, a certainty that this was a path I could not escape from. The tribe's warriors followed us, their horses moving silently behind us like shadows in the fading light. I could hear the distant murmur of their voices, but they didn't speak to me. They spoke amongst themselves, no doubt wondering whether I would survive the judgment awaiting me. The journey to the village felt long and drawn out, the silence stretching between us. My heart raced in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I had made my decision, and now I had to face whatever lay ahead. The sacrifice was inevitable. I had chosen to protect the girls, and now I had to pay the price, whatever that price was. As we neared the village, I could see the smoke rising from the fires, the sound of drums filling the air. The village was alive with activity, the people moving about, preparing for something. And as we entered the heart of their settlement, I knew that everything I had done had led to this moment. This was the trial, the test of my honor. The elders gathered before me, their faces still as unreadable as ever. They watched me with a level of scrutiny that made me feel smaller than I had ever felt. And then, the leader stepped forward once again, his eyes never leaving mine. "You have come to stand before us," he said. "Now you will prove your words. Your actions will determine your fate." I stood tall, my chest rising with every breath, and I knew that I had no more excuses. This was it, the moment where everything I had done, everything I had fought for, would be tested. I would face whatever came next. There was no going back. The tension in the air was thick, like a heavy fog that refused to lift. The village, with its humble dwellings and open fires, seemed oddly silent despite the busy preparations around us. The drums still beat, but they no longer felt like a celebration. Instead, they were like a countdown, each beat a moment closer to whatever fate awaited me. I stood in the center of the village, the elders and warriors gathered around me, their faces as unmoving as stone. I could see the weight of judgment in their eyes, the harsh scrutiny that came from years of living in a world where survival often meant the difference between life and death. The leader, who had guided me here, stood to the side, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Behind him, the girls watched from a distance, their faces pale with fear and uncertainty. I could feel their gaze, their silent plea for me to succeed, to prove that the decision I made hadn't been in vain. It was then that the elder woman, the one who had taken my hands earlier, stepped forward. She was older than the rest, her hair silver, her face lined with the years of wisdom and hardship. Her eyes, though stern, carried a sense of quiet authority. As she approached, the other elders fell silent, awaiting her words. Her presence commanded respect, and even the warriors around me seemed to hold their breath. "You have come here seeking redemption," she said, her voice calm but filled with the weight of centuries of tradition. "But redemption is not easily granted. It is earned through sacrifice, through understanding. You have taken responsibility for your actions, but the question remains, are you willing to bear the consequences of your choice?" Her words cut through me like a blade, stripping away any hope of an easy resolution. I had known that I would have to face the consequences, but hearing it spoken aloud made the reality all the more daunting. I wasn't here just to justify myself. I was here to prove that my actions had been taken with honor, that I had not acted out of selfishness or desire for gain. I had saved those girls, but now, I had to show them that I was willing to accept whatever came next. I said, my voice steady, though my heart pounded in my chest. I am ready to accept whatever justice your people deem necessary. I did not take the girls to harm them, and I did not act with any ill intentions. But I understand that what I did has consequences. I am here to face them. The elder nodded, as if my words had weighed something in her mind. She turned to the rest of the council, exchanging quiet words with the other elders. I couldn't hear them, but I could feel the tension building. This was the moment. This was the test of everything I had done. Would they see my actions for what they were? Would they believe that I had acted out of compassion and not greed or malice? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the elder turned back to me. Your words are not enough, she said, her tone resolute. But your actions speak louder than words. You have chosen to protect these girls. You have chosen to stand before us and accept the consequences. That is a choice not many would make. You will not be punished for your intentions. Instead, you will be given a chance to prove your worth. The words hit me like a wave crashing against the shore, overwhelming in their intensity. I hadn't expected this, a chance to prove myself. I had prepared myself for the worst, for retribution, for death even. But this was different. This was an opportunity to show them that I wasn't a threat, that I wasn't an invader or a fool who had made a mistake. I had made a choice, and now I would have to prove that it had been the right one. What do you ask of me? I said, the words coming out more quietly than I intended. The elder's eyes softened just slightly. You will undergo a trial, she said. A trial of character, a test of your resolve. You must show that you understand the weight of your choice, that you are willing to live with it no matter what the cost. Only then will we know that you are truly worthy of redemption. A trial. I wasn't sure what that meant exactly, but I knew enough to understand that it wasn't going to be easy. The village had its customs, its ways of testing a person's heart, their honor, their worth, and I was about to face it head-on. Whatever they threw at me, I would have to endure. The leader nodded at the elder's words and then turned to the warriors standing nearby. One of them, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. He held a long spear in his hand, the blade gleaming in the light of the fire. You will face me, the warrior said. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that suggested this wasn't just a formality. This was real. You will show us your strength, your will. If you fail, you will not leave this place alive. The words struck me hard. The weight of the decision pressed down on me even further. This wasn't just about surviving. It was about proving myself, about showing that I was willing to face whatever challenge they set before me, no matter the outcome. It wasn't about winning. It was about standing firm in the face of judgment and proving that my actions had been true. The circle of warriors closed around us, their eyes locked on me, waiting for me to make the first move. I had no weapon, no advantage. All I had was my resolve, and that, in the end, would have to be enough. As I squared off with the warrior, I felt a surge of adrenaline. The fear that had plagued me since I first saw the girls now transformed into something different, something fierce. I wasn't just fighting for my life anymore. I was fighting for what I believed in, for the girls, for my honor. I took a deep breath, focused on the warrior before me, and then I made my move.